Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
You know, it often takes a village to make these things, these TV shows, these films that we love. And as we're always told, it does take music to make that world, that village go round and round. And guess what? If you're within the sound of my voice, that must mean you are in the seats with once more. As always, my name is Dave Voigt, and I'm the host of this podcast, where we sit down with a wide-ranging variety of entertainment industry professionals, and we pick their brain about current projects, state of the industry, how they got started, and so very much more in a light and in a conversational fashion. And you know, if you like how we do things around here, I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that you do, because let's face it, you're listening right now. And if you are listening, keep listening. Subscribe, give us the old 5-star rating, push the notifications. You know, give us the thumbs up wherever it matters on your podcast provider of choice. We're available pretty much everywhere. Places like Apple, Amazon, Spotify, Google, and plus we archive every single one of our episodes over at our In the Seats YouTube channel. So if you can give us a like and subscribe there as well, we would absolutely appreciate it. Also, don't hesitate to check us out on social media. We're on the Facebook, the Twitter, the Instagram, the Letterboxd, the TikTok, the Tumblr, the Threads. I lose track. There's so many. But we're at In the Seats for all sorts of fun updates. And finally, and I do dare say most importantly, please pay us a visit over at In the Seats. InTheSeats.ca for all the latest and greatest from the world of film, television, basically the moving image at large. Because guess what? If we love to watch it and write about it and talk about it, we love it even more when you come by and read about it and listen about it. So please do us that kindness and pay us a visit. On this episode, we dive headfirst into the brand new show, which is on Paramount Plus now. I believe all the episodes are on there. You can watch the whole thing. It's called The Gentleman in Moscow, starring the one and only Ewan McGregor, and well, it's a fun little character drama. I mean, without saying too much, it's more of a miniseries, really. But I mean, it's the story of a Russian aristocrat right around the time of the revolution and the rebellion and the whole thing. He's spared from death and he's placed on house arrest while the Bolshevik Revolution plays out before him from his, his meager hotel room. And it's historically interesting, but it's also kind of funny as well, just to see this aristocrat kind of existing in this world. And it's a very well done show. It's a gorgeous show, and I mean, there's great music in it too. And this is one of those things where the music kind of moves the period, and it makes you feel the moments of it all. And we had the unique pleasure of sitting down with somebody very key to this whole process, the music supervisor, the one and only Zoe Ellen Bryant, and talked about just sort of the nature of the job and working on the show and just how the job changes and how it evolves. Because I mean, when you say music supervisor or working in the music department on a show or a movie, it's a pretty broad description, because it encompasses quite a bit that they have to do when it comes to getting their job done. And it's just another fascinating look behind the scenes at what goes into making these fantastic shows and movies that we watch every single day. It's what we try to do here, and it's what they do every day. It takes a village on so many fronts. But I mean, if you haven't signed up for Paramount Plus, I do recommend you do it. It's a great service. And check out A Gentleman in Moscow, which is there now. But first, enjoy our talk with Zoe Ellen Bryant, because between you and me, it's a pretty darn good one. But I mean, just to kick this off officially, I mean, obviously, first off, just thank you so much for the time today. I really appreciate this. And I mean, congrats on your work on Gentleman in Moscow.
Thanks very much. Yeah, it was a good one to work on.
No, I mean, I'm curious with something like this, because it really feels like, like being in the role of music supervisor, it's one of those things where it could kind of be anything. Like, how early on in this process did you have to sort of get involved? Because I can imagine research period, sort of knowing what was played and when and that kind of thing, all kind of come into play with a show like this.
Yeah, there was definitely a lot. It varies on shows. On this particular one, we were brought on quite late, I would say. Ideally, we'd be brought on as soon as there are scripts to read. In this instant, on this show, I think we were maybe about 3 weeks before they started shooting, which is slightly late, but particularly when you've got in-vision musicians to shoot. 3-ish weeks before they started shooting from memory. Yeah.
So, I mean, what does your job
what happened
involve in
here.
something like this? Just sort of finding someone who can play instruments from that period?
Yeah, so on this, so this, because as I mentioned, there are so many in-vision musicians, as in
Yeah.
like musicians we're literally seeing on camera that are performing. There's string quartets, jazz trios, jazz singer. What else is there? One of the main characters is the violinist in the string quartet, Paul Reddy, the actor. So we had to basically immediately, as soon as we came on board, we had to obviously read the scripts as soon as possible, identify as a priority any in-vision music uses that were happening. So yeah, the string quartets and all that kind of stuff. Figure out which ones we're shooting first. Then we had to work with a fixer, which is a person that basically helped us find musicians because filming was all happening in Manchester.
Hmm.
We it made sense to find a fixer that was based near Manchester that could help us at quite short notice find musicians that were based near Manchester that would be available to go and film. So we worked with someone in Manchester to help find musicians. He helped us find the string quartet players, the jazz trio players, the Russian folk band, the Balalaika ensemble that you may have seen in, I think it's in episode 2, that one.
Mm, yeah,
So we
yeah.
worked with, yeah, we worked with a fixer called Jack Hughes who works at Northern Film Orchestra to actually find musicians at quite short notice. And we had to obviously put them in touch with costume and get them fitted ahead of the filming days. We also had to, so that the musicians had some guide on the day, we had to organise pre-records of the pieces of music that they were going to be performing, as well as we had to decide what those pieces were going to be, which is where they're kind of, in the earlier episodes, it's, you know, we were looking at classical music. It then moves into jazz and more contemporary music as the decades progress. But yeah, initially we were looking at what classical pieces those musicians would be performing in the hotel.
No, I mean, I'm curious.
So it's a lot.
No, it is. No, it is a lot because it's one of those things that
Yeah.
people off from the outside looking in don't necessarily kind of appreciate sort of the moving parts that are involved. And I mean, it's one of those things where even if you compare something like this to another shoot you've been on, like Blinded by the Light, someone on the outside might go, "It's just Springsteen. What does she have to supervise?" But it's like, no, there's so much more to it.
Yeah, well, I will say that this project, Gentleman in Moscow, was more complex than Blinded by the Light because because that, to be honest, that was, I mean, Gorinda knew she wanted Bruce Springsteen songs. She knew which Bruce Springsteen songs. There were other songs in there that were not Bruce Springsteen, but that was, you know, there was some creative involved in terms of suggesting ideas for the non-Bruce Springsteen songs, but mostly that was a licensing project for us. Whereas this, A Gentleman in Moscow, was, I would say, one of the most complicated, complex, challenging projects we've done because it's not just the creative and deciding what people are going to play. It's finding the musicians. It's, you know, a very complicated shoot schedule. It's organizing pre-records. It's making sure there's someone there on the shoot days to oversee the musician's performance. And in addition to that, there's all the, you know, post-production, the music that gets added in later. So in addition to all the in-vision musicians, there's the other part of music supervision, which is, I don't know, you might have music playing in the background in a scene or music that gets added in later. So there's all that as well. So this, yeah, it was a very complex
It
but
really feels like
interesting one.
like the job requires multiple skills from being able to secure licensing to be able to just, depending on where you're shooting, to go, okay, yeah, I know a guy, he lives 4 blocks around the corner. He can play a viola. Let's give him a call. Like this, like it
Yeah,
feels like your job, it kind of runs the gamut of things that you have to do.
yeah. There's definitely a lot of parts, which is why I love it. It's really, it's a very interesting job. It's not just making playlists of music. It's, yes, it's kind of thinking of ideas for, you know, songs that you might want to license for a project, but it's finding out who owns them, finding out who the writers and publishers are, finding out who the label is, approaching those people, negotiating fees. Sometimes things get denied and you've got to rethink and you've got to, you know, think of alternatives and try again. But it's also like on The Gentleman in Moscow, there was a lot of public domain out of copyright research that needed doing because we didn't have a huge budget, and also because of the time it's set and the type of musicians that you're seeing, it makes sense to use classical music. But there's some, like Rachmaninoff, for example, that's not quite out of copyright worldwide. So there's that aspect to it as well. And yeah, as I mentioned, sourcing musicians. There's many different things in this job, which is
What got
fun.
you involved in sort of this side of the business? Because I mean, in many ways, I mean, I don't know if you are a musician or if you have, but this feels akin to me like producing an album in many ways. If that's a
Yeah,
right analogy.
maybe. Well, I've never produced an album, so I can't say for sure. But yeah, it's definitely, I guess there's a definite producer, juggling lots of things element to it. The way I got into it, I mean, I'm not a professional musician, definitely not, but I have learnt instruments. My mum, she's retired, but she was a music teacher. So music's always been a big thing for me and my favorite thing, to be honest. I got into it. I'd always loved the idea of picking music for, well, for films, really, films that I got obsessed with when I was a teenager, but I never realized that it was a real job until I was working in a cinema. And I think I happened to see Music Supervisor on the credits, so then investigated it, bought a book about it. I was working at a cinema, and the guy that owned the cinema, I asked him if he knew anyone that did this kind of job, and he knew someone who did something similar. So I got in touch with her, ended up working with her for a year, and then I sent my CV out to every music supervisor in London, I think. I had a whole spreadsheet to keep track of who I'd made contact with. And that's how it started. Luckily, Pete, who I work with now and have worked with for 8 years, got back in touch and gave me a trial day. And yeah, that was eight and a bit years ago.
I mean, I've been in this entertainment industry for a minute. It's still, on many days doesn't feel like it's a real job. So I mean, it's one of those things I think we all have to struggle with a little bit.
Yeah, I guess so. I think over here it's maybe, I think in LA, Hollywood, I think it's been a job that's been known about longer than it has been over here. I think over here people are amazed that it's a real job, and there seems to be a lot of people that want to
I'm in Toronto,
do
so we're
it.
we're somewhere in between.
Oh, sorry, yeah,
LA,
Toronto,
and you, so
okay.
we're like kind of right in the middle. But
Yeah. But
no,
probably Toronto, I imagine in Canada as well, it's been maybe a known about job longer than it has been over here, maybe, because I
well,
feel
with
like
the
it's a
movie shooting
relatively
of the
new
past few
thing.
years, for sure. No, no, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
But I mean, I'm
yeah.
curious. I've got to ask, like, was there a moment that you understood, like some movie you were watching, where you understood sort of the power of the marriage between the music and the image? Because I mean, obviously they're both fantastic on their own, but sometimes when you put it together, it just turns into something that much more.
Yeah, it has to be Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet. I don't it's not like I didn't notice music in film or TV before that, but that's the one that really made me notice, and I was completely obsessed with that film and the soundtrack, and can't hear those songs now without seeing, the scene that they were from. So definitely that film is what really sparked the interest between the two.
Now, I'm curious for you as, music supervisor. I mean, how do you know when to, I guess, maybe turn down the music or let it sort of sit in the background? Because I mean, especially in this show, like I noticed there were some moments where the music is where there wasn't music. Like, I mean, almost when they're in sort of like I think it was the first episode, they're in the garden and you hear the bird and then the music's coming in kind of in and out lightly. And I mean, it was such a beautiful bit. And I mean, I could tell the difference. And I mean, it feels like when you're putting stuff together, it's not about sort of designing a wall of sound. It's knowing when there shouldn't be any at the same time.
Yes, I would say I'm not so involved in where music is and where it isn't.
Right.
That's definitely a collaboration between, well, yeah, I mean, us, the composer, the director, other people that, are involved in deciding which bits are going to be score and which bits are going to be existing music or InVision. I guess the InVision music scenes are obvious, but In terms of volume of music, that's more kind of music editor, mixer
That's fair.
territory.
That's
So
fair.
that's we do get involved sometimes if we want to kind of present a few ideas quickly. We do cut ideas to picture ourselves and send them over. So then we'd have a go at, volume and
Well, and that's the kind of thing that I'm curious about because I could imagine in your job you always have to be listening to things and looking for new ideas and looking for things where places will work. It's never, there's always going to be a bit of fluidity to your job to sort of try different things as opposed to go, no, this is how it is. Like it's not a straight line in your job. You definitely have to sort of be open to multiple ideas.
oh yeah, definitely. It's never like, fixed from the beginning what the music's going to be, where the music's going to be. There might be music somewhere it gets taken out later or vice versa. Yeah, it's definitely a, you know, um, process of figuring out what works best and what music works best, what type of music, whether that's going to be score or us licensing existing piece of music. So yeah, it's definitely a creative process that, yeah, by the end of it is decided, but definitely not decided at the
Now,
beginning.
I'm curious. In at the end of the day, just to start putting a bow on this, where does the creative payoff come in your job? Is it being able to find that right musician for that right scene, or oh, I can't believe we got the licensing to that song? Like, where does sort of the emotional payoff come for you?
Both of those things. I would say sometimes maybe the best moments are where, I don't know, maybe there was a really good idea for a track for a specific scene, and for some reason we can't license it, and you're really, really struggling because everyone's got so attached to that piece of music that they wanted, and we can't license it. Then, there's a whole process to try and find something that as good as that one that everyone's attached to. So when you finally find a piece of music that is as good as what they had there or even better, that's obviously a really good moment. And then being able to license it obviously is a huge relief, because if you got the first idea denied and then the second amazing idea that you've taken weeks to find and then that also got denied, that would be pretty bad. So
Sure.
yeah, finding something that really works, managing to clear it. Sometimes the clearance process can be very complicated. There might be, I don't know, we've had songs that have 15 writers on them or something.
Yeah.
And if you can't find one of those writers, even if they've got maybe a 3% share, if you can't find that writer and get their approval, then there is no approval.
Yeah, when you're
The other
clearing music, there's no such
97%
thing as good
doesn't matter.
enough or close enough. You got it. It's got to be 100%.
No, there are instances where if you can prove, to a good enough legal-ish standard that you have tried every avenue to find this missing person, then production can make a decision whether to risk it and set the money aside. That can happen sometimes if you can really prove that you've exhausted all
We got
avenues.
14 out of
But
50, and boy, we've tried, and they're like, okay, just go with it, and then we'll put a little bit
yeah,
of the
if
kitty
the
for you.
risk, if the legal risk seems low, then that yeah, there have been times where productions legal people have agreed to keep it in.
Well, I mean, Zoe, just
But yeah,
thanks for the insight on just the I guess sort of the day-to-day parts of a job like this, because I mean, people watch these shows and movies and they see this massive list of credits, and 95% of the population out there don't always understand what so many of them mean. But I mean, just again, thank you again for the work and just take giving us, like I said, giving us some insight on what it means to do music supervision for a big show like this. But I really appreciate it.
very welcome.
All
Yeah,
right.
there's many people involved. Even just in the music bit of a show, there's many people. So yeah, the overall amount of people is insane
It
sometimes in
takes
a
a village. It
production.
really does, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Yeah,
But I mean, again, Zoe, just thank you so much for the time and congrats on your work on the show.
very welcome.
Yeah,
Thanks very much.
you're
Lovely to
welcome.
meet you.
Lovely to meet you.
Okay, thanks
All
very
right.
much.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye. Bye bye.
And don't forget to visit our friends over at Bay Street Video for all your DVD, Blu-ray rental, or purchasing needs this summer, as they are still open for curbside and some mailing delivery as well. Over at 1172 Bay Street, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, you can give them a call at 416-964-9088. That's 416-964-9088. Or send them an email at baystreetvideoto@gmail.com for any of your DVD and Blu-ray needs.